For police officers, responding to domestic incidents is often the most dangerous thing they face. Today's video is brought to you by the generosity of Newbold targets. Newbold targets are self-sealing reactive polymer targets that act like steel targets for training and practice, but are safer than steel. They allow bullets to pass completely through the target without ricochet or lead splatter. Check out their links in the description and thank them for bringing us today's video. Welcome to today's active self-protection lesson. I'm your host, John Correa. Today we have a lesson, an officer-involved incident that involves some custody issues of a child and escalates and gets out of hand in a hurry. Make sure to read the news stories on this one. This one starts as a custody issue that this man and his ex-wife are having problems with the kids. His ex-wife is the one who gets to decide where the kids are enrolled in school. He decided to enroll one of his daughters in this school without her permission. And so the principal asked these officers, the school resource officers, to be there while they figured everything out that was going on. Well, the officers finally asked him to leave, and he does not want to leave. We have audio in a little bit, but he decides that these officers don't have any authority over him when they actually do. Now, he's an Antifa activist, has really known to be incredibly anti-police officer, so they decide to hook him up for trespassing and disorderly conduct when a fight starts. Now, what you're gonna see here is the first officer's body cam. We're not really gonna be able to see anything from here, but on the second officer's body cam, we have audio and we'll get to see what's going on. So we're gonna listen in this second time, hear what goes on from the second perspective, then we'll come back and think about some significant lessons out of this one.
I do. I'm actually the school.
Me to leave.
Listen to me.
If the principal has not asked me to
Listen
leave.
to me. You're gonna end up.
Go! Go!
You're under arrest.
Let go
You
of
are
me.
under arrest.
Let go of me.
You are under arrest.
Let go of me.
Code 3 coercion.
Get out of here.
I think this lesson is a sad one, but I'm awful glad that the officers came out on top. Out of today's video, I do want to think about some significant lessons, including entangled gunfighting skills, working together as partners, and about working from an initiative deficit to protect your life. So from Officer John's body camera here, what we want to see first of all is the fact that these guys do have to work together as partners. And one of the things you got to be aware of is you got to be aware that the eyes are the windows to the soul, but the hands are the windows to the intent. And notice that around police officers, this guy's got his hand in his right pocket. Now we know later that this guy has a gun on his right hip. And my guess is he's using this handed pocket to just kind of check that that gun is in its right spot. It's in a holster on his hip, not in the pocket, but he's using that to keep checking that and to protect the gun. When you got a hand that's not visible to you in any kind of verbal confrontation, you have to pay attention to the hands and recognize that when they are checking like this, this can be a sign that something is definitely amiss. Now, again, notice the fact that these officers are being very professional. They're trying very kindly to interact with this guy and go, look, man, the paperwork says what it says. But this guy is virulently anti-cop. If you read his shirt says smash the patriarchy and chill. So obviously he is signaling his intent with that kind of shirt before these officers. And they're still trying to be intent and to use verbal de-escalation and verbal judo. And they're working pretty well as partners. Notice that they have him in an L here. One's facing him head on, one's to his side. So they're trying to stay away from him, keep them in a tactically advantageous position. But you would rather have an advantage from the perspective of attitude first rather than tactics. Now, when they go here, we're going to go to the other, Officer Tim's body camera here. Want to pay attention to them working as a team because that's an incredibly important part of this video. Is if you have a partner, whether that's a law enforcement partner, whether that's your significant other, whether that's your best bud who you always hang out, knowing how to work together as a team if you were to have a problem, incredibly important here. And they are keeping him, one's got his attention while the other one's paying attention to what he's doing, and then they're able to act somewhat in concert here. You notice the officer's going to put this paperwork away so they can get after him. Now, there's going to be a question here about whether they had justification. Clearly, at this point, they have justification to arrest this guy for disorderly conduct and trespassing. They told him several times to leave. He'd been asked to leave several times. That was entirely right to do. He refused to do so. That's trespassing. And then he started cursing and those things. So now he's acting in a disorderly way. So clearly, the officers had justification to arrest him for disorderly conduct and trespassing. Now, of course, he doesn't like that because, for a number of reasons, but it was eminently reasonable what they did. Now, what's going to happen here is he's has a firearm on school campus, which is legal in Oregon for CCW holders. Now, notice here he's going for the gun. You can see that with his right hand, which is why we always say in the 5Ds plus 1, you have to deflect and dominate, man. You got to watch the hands, and you got to work together as partners to get that hand, especially the dominant hand. If you leave an arm out there in space in a weaponized environment, which this is, it's a public environment, now, you got to recognize that can be dangerous. Now, if you go read the news stories that I've linked in the description, this guy is a firearms instructor, and as particularly his focus is on firearms instruction among people of color and LGBT community. But you recognize that you leave that arm open to somebody who knows what they're doing. They can use it to do you harm. In this case, unfortunately, that person is not meaning well. And notice that the officer has a hold of neck and one arm, but when you leave that second arm out and he's digging that gun out, he finally is going to get it out. But also notice that as he's pulling that gun out, that the officer is trying to get a hold of that arm. What he's got here is a Taurus 9mm. It's obviously a clone of a Beretta 92. And he has an extended magazine on that, 20+1 in the gun. I don't care if he only has 3 in the gun. This is a deadly threat. The guy has pulled a gun on them in the lawful performance of their duties, and this is clearly a deadly threat to both officers. And what we're going to see is how fast they have to respond when they do get to see the gun. Notice right here, he has this gun pointed at Officer Tim. So this guy's not just brandishing a firearm, he is using it to attempt to murder a police officer. And notice that it's going to come back on him here. And this is the place where we see the shots fired, that you see 2 shots fired from this guy's gun. And thankfully, both of them missed the officer. But think about how close proximity they are here, those bullets passed right by the officer's body. Now, the officer didn't have to wait for the guy to fire. Upon seeing that gun, the guy drawing a gun, trying to resist arrest, that's a deadly threat. However, in this instance, even easier justifiable. And you got to recognize you only have split seconds here in order to get to an advantageous position. And Officer Tim did that, got around to the backside here, drew his firearm. Something interesting that I want to see on the right-hand side, you can see the officer there, his gun in the lower right-hand quadrant. And notice that he has fallen down, which makes sense in the tangle. But notice that he has good trigger finger discipline here. Very important, because when we talk about drilling that trigger finger discipline, that will keep you from having a negligent discharge or an accidental discharge when you fall down, have a sympathetic, neuromuscular reflex there. He didn't. Good discipline, and instead gets back in the fight, takes a first shot and misses. But look at how close the officer is to our perp here. He's very close. So you got to have marksmanship skills here and get that shot on target. Now, these officers were working from an initiative deficit from the giddy up, but they got back ahead of the game, and thankfully Officer Tim put the second shot that he fired on target and ended the threat. All things considered, incredibly difficult situation to be in. Never want to see custody disputes like this escalate. Thankfully, the officers were ready, though. They covered their asp.